Okay, we've got 1,500 miles in the Demon, so now it's time to learn how to launch it. That's why we're here at Orlando Speedworld, where the Demon was developed with SRT Demon Development Engineer Jim Wilder.
All right, Jim, so this is what I need from you. So we just bought our Demon. I'll be honest, I'm not one to read the manual, so I really need this kind of instruction session to be not only my manual, but I think the manual for everybody else that has a Demon.
Sure.
Okay, so let's start in the basement and kind of work our way forward in regards to what I need to know to properly get this thing down the racetrack.
Yep.
And more importantly, I just be safe as well.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, to kind of step back a little bit, there's really 3 ways to launch the car at the drag strip. You can foot brake the car, which means brake torquing, 1 foot on the brake pedal, the other foot on the gas pedal, and just giving it a little bit of gas, bringing it off idle, and then taking your foot off the brake and going in with the throttle.
Okay.
Just like you would at a stoplight, on the street. Obviously, on a drag strip, you're being more aggressive. So that's the first way to launch the car. The second way to launch the car would be using launch control. Now, that's something we've had in cars for quite a few years now.
Right.
I think most people are pretty familiar with it. We'll go through it step by step, though. But really, we discourage people from using that at the drag strip because it's a prepped surface. And launch control really is for more of an unprepped surface.
Okay.
It's designed to spin the wheels at a controlled rate.
Okay.
When you're on a prepped surface at the drag strip, you don't want to spin the wheels. You want them to dead hook and just accelerate the car.
So in what instance would you use launch control? Like if you went to a strip that had just a kind of a concrete slab, no prep, something like that, or
yeah,
like a
something
runway,
like that. Something like that.
Okay,
yeah, for
fair
sure, for sure. Something that doesn't have glue on it and rubber built up on top of it.
Okay.
So yeah, running a standing mile, maybe you'd want to launch the car like that, something like that.
Okay.
The third way is TransBrake, and that's obviously something new that we've done, brought TransBrake into the car. I would say it's technically the most difficult way to do it, but once you have some practice under your belt, it's really not that hard. There's some very distinct steps that you have to go through to do it. But after you practice it, after you've had some time to practice it, in a parking lot, an empty space, something like that, where you can really get the steps ingrained, it's really not that difficult to use, and it's the quickest way to get the car down the track.
Let's talk about pedaling the car. How would I do that, getting the most out of this thing on the drag strip?
Sure. So, and it's really the first step, the way I really encourage people to start, because it gives you the most, as a driver, the most feel for the amount of grip you have, because your right foot, is completely in control of how much tire spin you have. So your foot needs to dial into the grip that you have, be it the track surface, be it the tire, be it a combination of the two. Before we even do that, we want to do a burnout to get the tire hot so that we can get as much grip as we can in place. We'll go through the screens to get there. The line lock screen. So the way to get there is the SRT button is our shortcut to the drive mode screen.
And the SRT, that'll bring up our drag custom settings and everything that we want to utilize that, correct?
Yep,
okay.
Absolutely. So we bring that screen up. There's a button in the middle called drag options. We push that, and we've got several different selections here. We've got launch control. We just talked about that a minute ago. We've got shift light. We can step through that. Race cooldown, which is an after the run engine shut off feature that will run the intercooler pump and the fan to keep the car cool.
Gotcha, okay.
And then line lock. So line lock is what we're talking about for doing a burnout. What you do is you select that, and then you activate it, and then you get messaging on the cluster how to run through that. Basically what the idea is I activate that. I'm going to make you put a certain amount of brake pressure and a minimum amount of brake pressure in. I believe it's around 1,000 PSI. I usually target 12 to 1,400 PSI. So a pretty firm pedal. Once I do that, my OK button on the steering wheel becomes my line lock button.
Okay, so it's...
I build the brake pressure, I press and hold the OK button, I take my foot off the brake pedal, and then the front brakes are locked, are held with the brake pressure that you built, and we bleed off the brake pressure in the rear.
So that's very similar to, I guess this would be an instance where it is somewhat similar to the line lock cars of old, where that button would be on the shifter, and you would just engage it, ready to go, spin the back tires, front brakes are locked.
Exactly. Okay, exactly. Gotcha. We tried to incorporate this as much as like a race car would do as we possibly could. Couldn't get one on the shifter, so we thought the steering wheel was the next best place. When you're doing your burnout, you don't have to floor it at all. You don't even come close to flooring it.
Well, on this car, no.
Yeah, there's plenty of torque. You're holding the front brakes. You don't have any brake pressure on the rear, so there's very little overcome. Exactly. Okay. So you lean into the throttle, maybe a half throttle, something like that. Okay. Do a static burnout for 2 or 3 seconds. Let go of the OK button, your line lock button. Let go of that. the car will start to roll forward. If anything, lean into the throttle slightly more as you're driving it out of the water box.
Okay.
Once you get about 5 feet, 10 feet out, back off the throttle.
Okay.
You never want to let go of the line lock button and dump the throttle immediately at the same time. It's a really good way to break parts, because what happens when you're doing your burnout, you just put a contact patch of rubber on the surface. If
very sticky.
It's very sticky.
Okay.
If you take all the torque away, you're liable to stop the tires instantaneously.
So it's just going to shock everything.
Put huge impact loads into the driveline.
Okay.
So you want to drive the burnout out.
Easy.
So you want to get the tire to between 180 to 220 degrees. Now, how do you measure that? Well, that's when your buddy brings his temperature measuring.
A little pyrometer?
His little pyrometer with him, and he does it for you. You as the driver can't do that.
Right, okay.
So now we've done our burnout. We're going to pull forward to the starting line. I really encourage people to 2-foot the car for the first while, just to get practice with that, just to get a feel for how quickly you can apply the throttle.
That's what I did the first time I drove it.
Yeah, for sure. It's the best way, in my opinion, to do it. So like I said, you're basically just going to get on the brake pedal, you're going to lean into the throttle, bring it up to 12 to 1500 RPM. When the light comes down, the green light comes on, foot off the brake, and then you lean into the gas pedal. Depending on the prep level at the track, in other words, how sticky the track is, will depend on how quickly you can go to the throttle.
Okay.
If the track is super, super, super sticky, you might be able to quote-unquote light switch the pedal. In other words, go from 1200 RPM to immediately to the floor.
To the floor, okay.
Yeah.
What's the realization of that? Give me a percentage of tracks that have that level of prep.
It's probably, it's not a unicorn completely.
But it's close.
But it's close.
Okay, fair enough.
It's going to want to be at a track that, number one, is a really good track, a very reputable track, has a really good surface, knows what they're doing prepping, and then probably has even gone beyond that and prepped for a drag radial. So feeding that throttle rate in is really critical, and that's something that really takes feel and practice and time to do that. What I usually like to tell people is when you're driving the car, you start going into the throttle. So at the launch, your foot comes off the brake, you start leaning in with your right foot. When you feel the nose of the car start to pitch up and you're transferring weight, that's usually kind of the cue that you can really start feeding the gas in a lot faster.
Okay.
If you bypass that part, in other words, you go through the pedal really quick where you don't give the chassis time to respond and start weight transfer, you're probably going to spin the tires unless you're at that super, super sticky surface.
I'm assuming that just comes with just practice and experience to feel kind of when the car is going to kind of rear back.
Yep.
And at that point, so if you're here, because again, this is one of the few cars that really does lean back and transfer weight in that sense, you know, when you feel that nose lift, is there a certain threshold, or you just kind of, that's just something you'll get used to? It's
definitely something you'll get used to. You start to feel, and this is you know, split second stuff here. This isn't like seconds.
Right.
This is like very quick. So seat time obviously is critical to this. But when you feel the front end of that car start to rise, you know you're transferring weight. That's your cue to really start leaning
all the way down.
Into the throttle. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
But giving it that little slight split second of some gas to get the chassis to load up and respond, and then going in, that's
that makes
pretty
all
key.
the difference.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
All right.
So I like to tell people to practice that, because that same throttle response you need to use when you're using TransBrake.
Forget everything you know about how a TransBrake operates in the traditional sense, and listen to what Jim is going to tell you about how this TransBrake operates, because this really, at this point in this car, is the only way that it matters.
Yeah, I mean, bringing a TransBrake in from an OEM perspective was a big deal. Yeah. We had to go through a lot of hurdles to do that. We had lots of strange looks when we started talking to people about doing a TransBrake, and you want to do what to the trans? Oh my gosh. A traditional TransBrake in a drag car, most drag cars will engage first and reverse at the same time. When you let go of the button, you drop the reverse clutch, the car immediately takes off. It's almost like doing a neutral slam, right?
Okay.
In this car, what we do is we engage first gear and then one of the clutches from second gear. Okay. That's the way we bind it up. I mean, all you need to do is bind the transmission
So the concept
up.
Is exactly the same. You're just using...
Exactly the same. We're just using a different clutch.
Right, okay.
What we do, the extra step that we do, and this was really and truly the only way we could bring this thing in, is we need to have an extra step in there to take all the lash out of the transmission, the prop shaft, the rear axle, and the half shafts.
Okay.
The way we do that is we will make you two-foot it. So foot on the brake, bring your foot into the gas, and bring it up to a minimum of 1500 RPM.
Okay.
That puts enough load into the driveline to take all the lash out.
Okay, and you actually feel that.
And you feel that, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Once you've done that, we take off one of the pedals, we take our foot off the brake, the system is locked. All that torque is bound up.
Right.
If we didn't do that, if we didn't have a way to do that, we couldn't have incorporated the TransBrake.
Now, is that what you guys, that's basically what the torque reserve is?
That's not the torque reserve,
oh, okay.
No. So torque reserve, what we're doing is we're basically pre-filling the supercharger with boost.
Oh, understood, okay.
When we're doing torque reserve, we're shutting off cylinders to keep the throttle blade open.
Okay.
To keep the torque level where we need it, but keep the throttle blade open so we have the airflow path going.
Gotcha.
So we can build up to 8 pounds of boost at the starting line sitting still with torque reserve.
Oh, wow, okay.
So that's a tremendous amount of torque to instantly throw at the car.
Right.
Right? So that's with torque reserve and TransBrake in combination, the multiplication of torque is huge. It's really huge. You still have to manage it depending on the surface of the track, but that immediate torque availability there is big.
Okay. So go back to when you were saying, okay, so you're going to engage the TransBrake.
Yep.
Okay,
so the way we do it is you have to be in drag mode. So when we go to our mode page, we have to make sure we select drag mode. When we do that, it tells us all the things that we change over.
Yep.
So our power level is at 808. That's the pump gas level.
Right.
Transmission is in drag. So the shift schedule, and actually the torque converter lockup schedule is the quickest, is the setup for the quickest pass down the strip.
Okay.
So the shifts are the fastest. The torque converter lockup strategy is the quickest accelerating the car. Drag traction. So we have 3 modes of traction control in this car. Unlike most SRTs where we have 4, we have 3. We have street, drag, and then there's full off like we normally do. What drag does is drag takes away traction control. So there's still stability control, there's still yaw control, but altogether there's no traction control. Traction control is your right foot. It is all in your hands as the driver. Drag suspension, we put the shocks in the back in firm. So firm rebound, firm compression. And we put the shocks in the front at firm compression, soft rebound.
So that the weight will transfer.
So we want the front end to rise.
Okay.
But unlike what some people think, and what we actually tried out, the back doesn't want to be soft compression. People think, well, you kind of want to push the rear end down. Well, you do want to push the rear end down, but I want the shock to push the tire down. I don't want the shock to squish as I'm transferring weight to the back.
So that shock, when the load hits it, is actually compressing the tire into the pavement.
Shoving the tire into the pavement.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. The last thing that we do is we divert all the AC performance to the intercooler. So the chiller is activated in drag mode. All your AC is diverted to chill the intercooler. We're trying to make as much horsepower as we can to go down the track, right? So everything we have is focused on engine performance.
And what percentage, how many degrees would that generally bring it down on average?
We can take up to 40 degrees, 45 degrees F of intercooler air temperature out. What you'll typically see when you're going down the return road, what you'll typically see on your cluster, if you're watching the intercooler liquid coolant temperature, not the air temperature, the liquid, you'll typically see somewhere around 15 degrees F below ambient.
That's a massive difference.
It's a big difference. It's a big difference. That's horsepower, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of horsepower. That's cool, dense air. That's horsepower. So on an 80-degree day, the engine can feel like it's cooler than that.
So this basically takes the place of everybody just packing the intake with bags of ice like they used to back in the day.
Sure. Absolutely.
That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Okay. So now that we're in drag mode, TransBrake becomes available. You've done your burnout again. We went through line lock. We did all that.
Right.
We pull to the starting line and we pull back both paddle shifters simultaneously. That tells the transmission, get ready, we're starting it. We're starting the process.
Okay.
At that point in time, you then need to go 2 feet in. We need to take the lash out of the driveline. Remember, we talked about that.
Yep.
So foot firmly on the brake pedal.
Right.
Bring the RPMs up to a minimum of 1,500 RPM.
Okay.
We don't let you go higher than 2,350. I usually tell people to target around 1,700.
Okay.
So you've got a little bit of cushion from dipping below, and you've got quite a bit of cushion to going above.
Okay.
What you'll notice when you go into TransBrake, when you're 2 feet in, you start bringing the revs up, at 950 RPM, we activate torque reserve.
Ah, okay.
And that's when you'll hear the car distinctly sound different. It's going to shake more. It's going to sound a lot different. Quite frankly, it sounds a little alarming the first time you hear it.
Right.
If you haven't seen it in a video and you actually do it yourself the first time, it's like, whoa, what's going on?
Right.
One thing I will warn about is once you get to 950, we turn it on. But if you don't keep going into the throttle to bring the RPMs up, if you stay at that 1,000 to 950 RPM range, when it's running in torque reserve, there's a chance because of the engine flares, it'll drop below 950, at which point torque reserve will shut off.
So it'll just kick you out.
It'll kick you out.
Gotcha. Okay.
All you need to do is take your foot off the gas, let it bring back to idle,
and then go back in. Okay, that's easy enough.
So 2 paddles in, 2 feet in, bring the revs up to 1,700 RPM. Once you do that, you've met all the steps to incorporate to activate TransBrake. You've got the drive line loaded up.
Right.
Paddles are pulled. Now what you do is you'll let go of one of the paddles.
Okay.
Either one, left
matter.
or right, doesn't matter. Let go of one of them. Take your foot off the brake.
Now that's
the creepy part.
Yeah, that's the creepy part, and I've done this, and it's a little unnerving if you're not used to it. But again, it's practice, and you get to that point where you take your foot off the brake, and the car doesn't move, and you're like, okay, I'm locked in. And again, you have to remember that you're in a car with, the potential to have 840 horsepower with high octane fuel and race fuel, and you have to respect that. So just, be cognizant of every move that you make and what you're doing, but understand that that's exactly what this was designed to do.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's practice as you as the individual to feel what the car is going to do, and ultimately just become comfortable with it. So every time you go to the drag strip, you can do that.
Yeah, it feels very second nature.
Yeah,
it needs to. Because it's a lot of car.
Yeah.
So for somebody to get into a 9-second car from the get-go,
it's fast.
That's a lot of car.
It's a lot of car.
So you've got to get to the place where you're comfortable with it, respect it, but get comfortable with it. So yeah, once you're down to that point, your foot comes off the brake, you're holding the car literally with whatever paddle you've got left. That is holding the clutches together. The ABS module is holding all that load that you put into the driveline so that we still have all the lash out of the driveline, but the clutches are now being held by that last paddle.
And that's it. That's what's holding you in place.
Once you're to that point, your foot has come off the brake, you can then adjust the RPM again.
And your other foot is still on the gas, right foot's on the gas.
Your right foot is still on the gas.
Okay.
You can bring the car down to idle or up to 2350.
Okay.
For practice purposes, I usually tell people, stick with an RPM.
Okay.
So go in, 2 feet in, go to 1,700 RPM,
get
and
used
leave
to
it there.
Get used to the feel of it.
Just leave it there. It's one less variable to mess with. Once you really get comfortable with it, then you can start playing with altering the RPM after you've gotten to the point of 1 paddle left.
Okay.
Once that 1 paddle is left, you're ready to go. You let go of that paddle, the clutch is immediately engaged, and then you feed the gas in.
And you're off.
And it's the same thing, and you're off. It's the same thing we did when we were doing 2-foot though. When we were brake torquing it, it's driving the pedal in. It's going in with the gas, letting the chassis respond a little bit, and then going in quick.
Okay. And what's really interesting about this is you don't have to be at a drag strip to practice this. You can find yourself a parking lot or kind of an open space, and because once you let off the TransBrake, you're not going to immediately floor it if you're practicing. You're just going to let off and you're going to feel the car move.
Right.
And it's just kind of a slower beginner way to get kind of used to the exact feel of the engagement, of the launch, and basically how the car is going to behave in that mode. And it's not as difficult as you think.
It really isn't, and no, Mike, you're 100% right. You need to practice this before you go to the starting line.
Yeah.
And if that means doing it at the drag strip in the pit somewhere, that's fine. Doing it in an empty parking lot, if you can find one, that's fine. Because that last step of letting go of the TransBrake, if you don't feed the gas in, the car just moves.
Right.
It doesn't take off. It doesn't launch.
Right.
But getting through all those steps, how quick do I need to go in with the gas pedal when I'm doing the 2-foot port of it? Get used to that. Get it so that you can go in and torque reserve kicks on and it stays on, and I can know by sound that I'm at 1,700 RPM, and I can start dropping a pedal.
Right.
And then taking my foot off the brake pedal. Get that so that you can almost do it blindfolded.
Right.
And then when you go to the starting line,
you'll be good.
You don't even have to think about it. It's like walking.
Well, and that's the thing. You have to understand that, for me, I utilize this this is our manual. This is my manual. You've got people in here. There are 3,300 of us that are lucky enough to have this car. Just go back and hit play again and watch it again and listen to what Jim has told us, listen to the information he has, use this as your guidebook, and I promise you, if you do that, you'll not only get the most out of your Demon, but it'll be one of the most fun cars you'll ever have the experience of owning.
I know, you think we've forgotten about launch control mode, but we haven't. Here's Jim again.
Another way to launch the car is with launch control. It's something we've had in the past. It's not a new feature for the Demon, but I'm going to go through the activation of it. So it's still in the drag options page. We're going to press the launch control button, and you can set the RPM in 100 RPM increments all the way down from 1,000 all the way up to 3,100 RPM. I would recommend starting a little bit low to get used to what grip you have. And this is really something that's not intended for a prepped drag strip surface. It's really intended for a surface that doesn't have glue and rubber built up on it. Maybe something like a standing mile track that you're running, something like that. If we bring that back down to say 1,500 RPM, we can activate it with the button on the radio, and it tells you that launch control is activated and set to 2,000 RPM. The other way to activate it is on the center console. Next to the high octane button, there's a button called launch. If you press that, you'll get the button to light up, and you also see that in the radio it says that launch control is activated. One thing that I do tell people is when you activate it, before you actually launch the car and go 2 feet in, just double check, give it a second look just to make sure that the button is actually still lit up. If something happened during the process of activating it and somehow it got messed up or it got canceled out, you just want to give it a quick double check and make sure that's still activated.
Right. That's all the instructions. Let's have some practice.
So activate.
Activate line lock. Now, it's telling me right now apply brake pressure.
Yep.
Right?
So bring it up to 1,300 PSI.
Okay, and by the way, for those, like 1,300 PSI is a lot of brake pressure, so you're pushing on this thing.
Yeah, you're giving a good amount of brake pressure, for sure.
Now, hold okay.
Press and hold okay.
Got it.
Foot off the brake.
Foot off the brake. Now it's in. Now I can hit the throttle.
More throttle. There you go. There you go. Let go of the button. Drive it out. Nice. Nice.
Okay. Pre-stage.
Yep. You can look at the wall for your hole in the wall for kind of a depth.
Light. Okay. Okay.
There you go.
Just pre-staged.
Inch forward. There you
Staged.
go.
This is the best car in the whole world.
This car's pretty awesome.
This is the best car in the whole world. Oh my God. It's...
This car's fun.
It's weird because it hits you, but it doesn't hit you. It almost feels like getting, like, if you've ever ridden like a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Like when you launch it, that's what it feels like. Like all of a sudden you're kind of shot back and you're like, I got this, I got this.
Yep.
But the car's not, like the car just totally stays straight and just does exactly what you want it to do.
Yeah.
But there is definitely that, that factor, like, should I put it to the floor? Is it gonna break loose? Like what's the threshold between traction and your right foot?
Yeah, and that's where seat time and that feel really comes from. You get more seat time under your belt and you're like, okay, I can keep going, I can keep going. Oh, there it is, I'm spinning, okay. It's
really, really neat that you guys kind of built in that, you've almost put like a dummy mode in the car where you know, for guys that are a little insecure about, you know, getting behind the wheel and they want to do it the right way, we have that option. Yeah. We don't have to all of a sudden get in this thing and be like, oh my God, it's so intimidating. Because the fact is, while it has a level of intimidation, it's kind of easy.
Now it's time to try a launch using the TransBrake.
Okay, now, still gonna activate line lock.
Yep.
Right?
So I want to warm the tires.
Yep, apply brake pressure, it's on, holding the OK button, gonna do the burnout. Roll out, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Go to the starting line.
Okay, now.
Turn the pre-stage light on. So we're going to do it a little bit different this time.
Okay.
I'm going to show you the way that I do it, which I think is good for if at some point in time you were racing.
Okay.
Pull both paddles.
Both paddles. Apply brake pressure, right?
Yep, bring the revs
Increase
up.
engine speed. Okay.
Let go of a paddle.
Let go of one paddle.
Let go of the brake pedal.
Let go of the brake pedal.
There you go.
the whole world, and I wasn't even flat.
That was it.
Before you go, make sure to subscribe to the House of Muscle channel by clicking below, and we'll make sure you never miss a new episode of the House of Muscle.